the best people who can help you is your customer, because they are the ones who are actually facing the problem. And that's, I think, the only truth is you have to be close to the customer.
Welcome back to the Restive Perspective. I'm Cameron Peake. It's a show about female CEOs and the journeys they took to get to the leadership seat. And I'm really excited this week to have Trisha Kothari here. Welcome, Trisha.
Thank you, Cameron, for having me.
So just to kick it off, tell us about your company, Unit21.
Yeah, Unit21 is an anti-fraud and anti-money laundering software company to help financial services companies identify, investigate, and report suspicious activity. So we work with banks, we work with fintech companies, and we help them identify if there's a fraudster on the platform, someone is leveraging the platform for money laundering, and through the investigation process of it.
And tell us the journey you took to launch your company. What made you decide to jump into this exciting but very esoteric space?
Yeah, it is really esoteric. Before my previous job, I didn't know anything about the world of fraud and anti-money laundering. And my previous role was I was a very early employee at a firm, the online lending company. And I was an engineer by training, built a lot of the engineering systems. There were 10 engineers when I joined. And the company scaled really rapidly. My last role there was I was the PM for identity and risk. And so I got to see a lot of the ways that fraudsters would try to steal money from a firm. And my the major vector of attack was really identity theft. I steal your social security number, your identity, and then get a loan for a $5,000 couch. And then after I get that couch, I don't pay it back, and technically the loan is in your name. So we would see a lot of identity theft and a lot of crazy types of fraud. And what we realized then was that we had to build a lot of the tools internally, because whatever was out there in the market to solve for fraud was really solving for very niche types of fraud, really for community banks, for credit unions, for more traditional banking. It was very much like, is your card swipe, is that potentially fraudulent? And I'm calling it niche by really the number of use cases it can solve. It was obviously the most prevalent way that fraud was occurring for most of these banks. And so when we were looking at different fraud vendors, there was nothing that really worked for a fintech company like Affirm, because we had such a different business model. We ended up building a lot internally. It was a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of effort. And that really opened my eyes to how big a problem this is and the opportunity. But really what excited me the most is fraud is never boring. There's always something new happening. It's a constant game of whack-a-mole. And the intellectual component of it was really exciting, but also the human component of the impact that this has on real people.
A lot of people may be interested in the intellectual side or the constant excitement around whack-a-mole, but what compelled you to actually start your company? Did you have, an entrepreneurial upbringing or kind of anything earlier on that seeded that journey for you?
Yeah, my dad is an entrepreneur, and so I always knew that that was an option that was available to me growing up. And when I was at a firm, it was really small, so I got a chance to learn from entrepreneurs and really see how they build their own businesses and the decisions they make and the way that they evaluate their decisions. So that was really exciting to me, which was ultimately why I decided that it would be a fun time to build something.
And what made you, you're working for one of the hottest companies kind of in tech at the time. What caused you to jump ship from that and do your own thing?
I'd been at a firm for almost 4 years by the time I left. And, it was time for me to take a step back and think about what else is interesting to work on. And the opportunity in fraud and AML was really big because it's a really big problem. The market is massive. And the way that the solution space for fintech companies was really not solving the core fundamental issue. And so it seemed like, good time to experiment with something. But ultimately, I think it would be very difficult for me to have continued to build this company if I did not really believe in the mission. And that really resonated and spoke to me of stopping bad actors and providing justice to good people.
So you almost felt like there was a bigger mission in front of you if you were to go out and do this, and kind of felt compelled to spread it beyond just one company. Was that kind of part of the motivation?
Often I'll think a lot of business ideas that could be interesting, but it just takes so much energy to build something and to go through not just launching it, which is in many ways a more easy part, it's a more creative part of the 0 to 1 phase, but of sticking through the grind of it all. I don't think it's really possible to do that unless you think what you're doing is cool. I don't really care about marketing tools, so I would never be able to build that type of business, even though there's probably a lot of great opportunity and market potential there. It's better served for someone who really deeply it affects them. And that was something that in my last role at a firm, I would just see how people's, if they were victims of fraud, how much of a turmoil it would take on their personal lives in a very, much more than an emotional, a real way. Like they would not be able to get a loan for a house, or they would not be able to apply for a credit card. And then the waterfall of those decisions on the financial choice that they have becomes very limited. And obviously, it really does ruin people's lives.
Tell me about how you actually made that jump from being at a firm, seeing this opportunity, to having a full-fledged company that was kind of out there. That leap, I know, can stymie a lot of people. And so what kind of gave you the conviction to say this is the right idea, this is the right time, and this is the first step I'm going to take?
Yeah, I think there are two components to taking a leap. The first is more mental. And I knew that, I live in San Francisco, and in tech, there's just so much opportunity that even if you fail, what's the worst? Like, you can get a job, and it's not really going to have this insane degree of impact on the rest of your life. It's just potentially some time that you tried and it didn't work out. And so I always had that at the back of my mind, that the risk component in Silicon Valley is actually quite minimal compared to a lot of other industries. So that is really, I would definitely encourage people to really think if that's true for them, then why not give it a shot? And then the second is I did a lot of market research. I spoke to 200 companies that were working with fraud vendors, AML vendors, and learned about the problems that they had. And by the time I decided that, okay, we should raise money and really invest time into making this a reality, I had a pretty high degree of conviction that there is something here.
Did you kind of quit your job at a firm and do this broad market research? Did you start it before to kind of give yourself some conviction? Like, what was the staging there?
Yeah, I quit my job at a firm and I joined this entrepreneurial community called South Park Commons, which it's evolved a lot since I've been there, but really the core philosophy has been the same, which is focusing on the -1 to 0 phase. Like really in the time that you're in between jobs or you're thinking about what you want to do next, it's a space for exploration. So I joined that, and then through that, my co-founder and we were exploring a few ideas, and this was something that really resonated with me, and we thought that it could also be potential to make a meaningful and impactful business.
Cool. So you kind of had a community around you that was encouraging you in a similar stage, it sounded like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really big part of entrepreneurship is it can be very lonely. I don't think most people really talk about it. But it is a very isolating experience because you're mostly with your thoughts all day and you're staring into the abyss. And things don't really go out as like up and to the right. It's not whatever's portrayed in media on Twitter has a big degree of revisionism, and everyone does it, and not even with malice in their heart, but more it's just how it is. Like the way you remember what happened is different from what the reality of it is. So that is one thing that I think was very instrumental, was having some degree of community, which gives some degree of accountability, some degree of camaraderie, and some sense of, okay, what are you seeing? Like you can really bounce off ideas. And that was really helpful for me. I think that's something that even if South Park Commons is something that one does not engage in directly, it is one should build a community like that as in their, especially their earliest phases.
I love that idea of the community holding you accountable, because I totally agree. Being a founder is one of the loneliest jobs, and you want to be kind of in it with other people that are encouraging you. But the accountability side is also really important, I think. So, so let's fast forward. You were engaged with South Park Commons. You went through 200 plus interviews. You had some conviction around the idea. What happened next? You go out and fundraise. Did you start kind of selling the product? What was that next step for you?
Yeah, so the next step was we did a seed round. And then after that, this was December 2018. So it's been 5 years since we started the company. And then we said, okay, let's build the product more. We just had a prototype and let's sell it. And then 2019 was really rough. We didn't have a single customer until August of 2019. And, we talked to a lot of people and they were really interested and excited about what we were doing. But they would often ask, they would always ask, who else is using you? And we would say, well, you would be the first. And they would say, okay, come back to us when you have another customer. And that was really difficult because it took a long time for that cold start problem to be tackled. And then, this is not going to be the case for everyone, but for our industry, we sell into risk and compliance. Risk and compliance is very naturally risk averse. And people won't necessarily want to try something new that could potentially send them to jail, which is completely reasonable. And I completely get where people are coming from. But for us, I remember at some point in April of 2019, we were 4 or 5 months into building the business. We didn't have a single customer. It didn't look like we would have any customers in the near future. I called my dad and I told him that I think this is not working. Like, I think we should just give the money back to our investors. And my dad was like, okay, just give it till December 31st of this year. And if it doesn't work, then, whatever, go back and do something else. And then that August, we started working with Coinbase for a really niche use case. But the Coinbase logo was something that people knew. And because Coinbase was something people knew, we got a meeting with Intuit. And Intuit is something that a lot of people know. It's, Fortune 500 company. It is, TurboTax, QuickBooks. They are products that households know about. And so we started working with them for anti-money laundering. And that really started the flywheel. So it took a year to get past that cold start issue. But in 2020, after we signed on into it, things started moving really quickly. And then the pandemic happened, which was very interesting. of course, no one knew what would happen in the world. But it led to a really big increase in digital finance. And fintech companies started exploding, and that really led to a flywheel effect. So I would say the business really took off in 2020. 2019 was still a year of exploration, of trying to find the first couple companies to take a bet on us.
And how, I mean, you mentioned Coinbase was like a niche use case. I mean, was that how you think you landed them? Like, what do you think that I agree that first customer is so critical. How do you think you pulled that one off?
Yeah, when I was looking at the first customer, I got so much advice that, make sure it is something that is true to what you want to build. Make sure that it is not something custom, and make sure that the use case fits what you have in mind for the vision of the company. But what I realized was, all that advice is well-meaning, but the reality of it is really different, right? The reality of it is that you need a logo, and you just gotta get one. Instead of like the other advice seemed a little bit more navel gazing, versus like actually being in the seat and saying that, okay, we need someone to use us.
Or it works in a vacuum, right? Like all things being equal, of course you want to do that, but you don't always have that luxury. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that was my big learning from that experience was, for a long time we were trying to find, okay, the perfect use case, the perfect application. And at some point we were like, okay, this may not work. Let's give this a shot. And I think my big learning from it was that advice comes from always a great place. People want to help other people. But when, what I started doing after that was I started questioning, where is that advice coming from? If that advice is coming from building, I don't know, a social media company in 2004, that's not going to be relevant to building a financial infrastructure company in 2019. And so it's important to see, okay, what has changed about the world and giving that advice, and what has stayed the same too. But the content advice on, okay, how do you find that first customer? How do you get break into an industry? What should you support for them? The best people who can help you is your customer, because they are the ones who are actually facing the problem. And that's, I think, the only truth is you have to be close to the customer. And I do believe that is potentially a constant and constant truth in Silicon Valley or in tech in general. That it's really important to look at the customer, because the customer ultimately defines what value you're going to create.
How did you, so I assume, given the fact that you've taken seed money, you went a while without a customer, you were getting were you getting a lot of investor pressure? And kind of how'd you handle that?
I was fortunate to have investors who were a little more, had more appreciation of the 0 to 1 phase, and let us, run our own course of discovery. But yeah, it definitely, people will ask you, investors, friends, like there will be someone, right, who's going to ask you about it. And I think the most important thing that I've realized in that phase was the speed of learning. And as long as you demonstrate what you are learning and the speed of learning, that is the most important, because the revenue numbers at that point doesn't matter. You don't really have a business. What is important is that, are you learning fast enough? Are you iterating fast enough? Are you shooting ideas out there, putting different things out there fast enough? And as an investor, that would give me the highest degree of assurance that the business is going to be in a good place.
So it sounds like a couple of major learnings from kind of 0 to 1 or 0 to the first couple of customers. I mean, what were some of the big learnings as that flywheel started to take effect all the way through to today?
Yeah. So after COVID, it's, with fintech really exploding, and then we started expanding into more traditional banking as well. It's been a really great ride. I'd say the biggest learning for me was whenever people would talk about, do you have passion for your idea? I would think, oh my God, this is such jumbo mumbo, nonsense. Like what is this? And but I do, now I do, looking back, I think I was wrong, because it's just, the journey will present different challenges. The market is going to change. There will be different things that will come up. There'll be people problems as you scale. The employees that you hire in your 0 to 1 phase are not going to be the employees that you hire when you have hundreds of customers. And so there's going to be a lot of change in that journey, which is why this whole experience is so exhilarating and a really amazing taste of life in its fullness. But my main learning is that it's really important to just like take it as it comes. There's going to be a lot of changes, and just tackle the problem in front of you. Keep the vision alive. Make sure that you're moving towards a vision, and don't compromise on the vision, but keep the focus really on the short term, and as much as possible maintain equanimity towards a lot of the problems that will happen.
I love it, coming full circle to why you started in the first place. It's clearly carried you through a couple of challenging times.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about fundraising. I mean, both how that initial process went with you, and then I know you've raised since then. So kind of how you tackled subsequent rounds as well.
I would say a seed round was the hardest compared to the B or the C. And the reason was that, in the seed round, you don't have anything, right? And you're kind of pitching a story or pitching a vision. So in many ways, it's harder versus the C. It's more, you're giving a spreadsheet, and it's more about numbers and your efficiency, your growth rates, your gross margins. That becomes it's a pretty business investment decision versus more of a bet on a founder or a bet on a thesis. So fundraising's changed a lot compared to 2019 versus our last round. And yeah, I think it's just important to recognize the stage you're at and what is needed to appeal to investors in that stage.
And what worked for you at the seed stage?
In the seed stage, I'd say it was quite difficult because for a lot of people, they were just not bullish on fintech. They were like, oh, what is fintech? There's Stripe, right? And who else? And I was like, oh man, there's a lot more in fintech than Stripe. So I think there's one recognition of not everyone's going to get what you're building, and that's okay. That doesn't mean what you're building is wrong. It just means that they don't have that context, and either they're willing to learn the context or they're not willing to learn the context, in which case you should not waste your time with them. The second learning that I had in the seed stage, or really what I think we did well, was we were talking to customers before, and we got a lot of examples from interviews of what the pain points were and what we could solve. And that was really important because it's very easy to get into storytelling mode and vision selling mode, but no reasonably intelligent person is going to believe you until you show a little bit of meat and the bone. And it doesn't need to be, a full-on revenue number in the seed stage, or it doesn't need to be that, oh, you're having the product used by X number of people, but more of that you've given it some actual thought, and versus just, a story that you spun out one afternoon. And the third was really being very mindful about, okay, what is going to take us from that 0 million to 1 million in revenue? And what is needed? How many customers are needed? What do we think is going to be the average selling price for the customer? What type of customers are we going to attract? That is helpful for an investor to understand, okay, I'll give you money. What are you going to actually do with it? Or are you just looking for money because you want to be an entrepreneur? So those were the three things where which we did well, that enabled us to focus on the right investors and make sure that we were having an intelligent conversation with them while still narrating the vision and the story behind what we think is really important. But the conversation was very much about, okay, here are the problems, this is what we're going to build, this is what it's going to solve, and this is what the money is going to be helpful for.
And one thing I'd love to touch on, I know you and I chatted about this before jumping on, and you had mentioned, growing up in India, you felt kind of less inhibited by some of the concepts of female founders and what it meant to be or not be one than we might face kind of in the media here. Like, do you want to touch on that story? I think it might be interesting for viewers and listeners.
Yeah. Yeah. So I grew up in India. I moved to the US when I was 18 for college. And, one thing that people often ask me, like, how's your experience as a female entrepreneur? And for me, the major difference between versus growing up here versus growing up in India from my experience of it was that in India there was just so much more focus. Like, there is sexism in India, there's a lot of sexism, but it's more overt and it's more like, oh, you can't work, but it's not these comments made at you, or it's not something that's really subtle and under the current. And I think it maybe a little more of the opposite is true in the US, where overt sexism isn't really a thing here, but it's still there. And in many ways, it was easier to get past the overt sexism because you just, don't associate with those people who think like that, or you just ignore them. And the covert one is difficult because it's a lot of media inception in your mind. You don't even know it's happening often. And I think that's the biggest thing. I really, I think it's already becoming much better, the experience of female founders and the number of female founders, and I'm very optimistic for the future. But I think one thing that's really important to tackle is covert sexism that people just imbibe in really small and silly ways, but it becomes a reality of why a lot of women don't want to take that risk to start a company. So I really encourage women, just go for it. It'll all be okay. And even if it fails, it'll be a really cool experience.
The lead into my last question, what advice do you have for women that are contemplating going into the CEO seat, aside from just take the risk, which you just said?
Yeah, I think meditate is really something that, because there's a lot of these factors that are sometimes out of your control. And what meditation really helps with is to remove those factors that are out of your control and somewhat divorce yourself from the emotion, and then see reality as it is. And once you see the reality as it is, then it's much easier to make decisions that are not made out of emotions or just out of, things that you may have absorbed subconsciously. So I think that's been a really useful tool in my life.
Amazing. Well, Trisha, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to chat with you.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching the show today. For more information, go to restive.com/blog. Check out the show notes. And if you'd like to see future episodes, subscribe on YouTube. Thanks.